It's Sunday, May 15th, 2011. It's actually my 7-year wedding anniversary, so happy anniversary, honey. And you're watching This Week in Linux News. There was a load of stuff to talk about this week, so let's go ahead and get started. As far as distro releases and updates, we did have a few this week. The LinuxGamers.net Live DVD version 0.9.7 became available this week. If I remember correctly, the Linux Gamers DVD is actually an Arch Linux Live DVD with a graphical environment and a bunch of pre-installed Linux native games on it. Basically, you've got a couple of new games, you've got updated software, updated kernel, updated compatibility, so if you have not tried this out before and you'd like to see what sort of games are available for Linux, definitely give it a download and check it out. Additionally, this week, Backtrack version 5 officially released. Backtrack, if you're not familiar with it, is a penetration testing distro where you can go and test what sort of things you can do to Windows machines and to networks and things like that. I will admit I have very, very little knowledge about it because I just haven't had a reason to use it before, but if you are into the penetration testing game, this is definitely a good distro to check out. It's based on Ubuntu Lucid with a 2.6.38 kernel in it, so it is relatively up to date on a long-term supported base. Yet another in a long line of Ubuntu-related releases. This week, Pinguy version 11.04 released. Just a couple of months ago, we looked at the previous version of Pinguy OS. Looks like he's gone ahead and based this one off of the newest version. However, it does not have Unity running on top of it. So if you were concerned about having to use Unity in 11.04, this might be a good option for you if you're not into Linux Mint. In my experience, it was kind of a mix between Ubuntu and Mint with a load of pre-installed software. He's asked me to take a look at it, so I will be downloading it and giving it a look, hopefully in the next week or so. And speaking of Linux Mint, we talked about it before that a preview had been released. The RC officially became available this week as well for Linux Mint 11. However, and I think I did mention this before, instead of going with GNOME 3 like the initial plan called for, they've decided to go ahead and stick to GNOME 2.32 with the traditional Mint environment, the traditional Mint menu and everything. So you should be perfectly familiar with the way that it looks and feels. So if you are a little bit confused by the default Ubuntu 11.04 look and feel, you might be interested in checking out Mint or Pinguy or any one of the other hundreds of remixes of Ubuntu that are available. Moving on to our next topic, however, Ubuntu Developer Summit happened this week in Budapest. As far as the keynote, there were a lot of things said, but one of the things that really stood out is Mark Shuttleworth claims that Ubuntu has approximately 12 million users at this point, and within the next 4 years, he anticipates that Ubuntu will have over 200 million users. As a person who does talk about Ubuntu on a pretty regular basis, I certainly hope to see a lot of those coming to my channel. In terms of what actually came out of the rest of the conference, there were some decisions made about 11.10. There were some things that are going to be added, some things removed, some things changed. The 2D version of Unity that's currently available is going to move from a Metacity backend or a Metacity, however you want to pronounce that, to a Compiz backend, so it should be consistent with the traditional Unity interface, but without all of the 3D graphics, so no hardware acceleration will be required. Also, as I mentioned before, the Classic Edition, the GNOME 2.32 interface that we all know and love, is going to be removed from the default 11.10 installation. There was some talk about changing the default browser, however, the session to do that ended up being cancelled, so they will be sticking with Firefox for the time being. It was decided to remove Computer Janitor and put in Deja Dupe. The plan is, of course, still to use GNOME 3 by default in Ubuntu 11.10, but with the Unity interface. They're going to move the default email client from Evolution to Thunderbird. And there should be a lot of improvements to the Software Center, making it sort of a web catalog of software instead of just a you can get to it from Ubuntu and see what you're doing from Ubuntu, moving a lot of stuff to HTML backends so that it's a whole lot easier to make it web-based. But also at the same time making it faster to start up, a little bit easier to look at, make it easier to find out what you're looking for, and adding some more touch-friendly elements to it. And also, I think I mentioned this in last week's video, they're moving from GDM, the GNOME Desktop Manager, to LightDM, which, if I remember correctly, is the one used in Ubuntu. And basically the reasoning behind that is to get away from the traditional login manager and just find a whole new login experience. And you might be asking yourself, what about a year ago we started talking about Wayland, and it was supposed to be coming with 11.04 or 11.10 or what? Turns out it was not ready, it's still not ready, so in 11.10 they're not going to be making it the default. It should be available through a PPA if I remember correctly, but again it will not be the default, so it won't be the default in 12.04 either, so they're just pushing it back and back and back. It is still a relatively young project, but hopefully they will get it going faster and faster in the future. But that's enough about Ubuntu Developer Summit for now. I'm sure we will have a lot more information coming out about 11.10 in the coming weeks. Let's go ahead and move on to Google I/O. You heard me right. Earlier this week, Google had their conference called Google I/O, where they talked a lot about Android and Chrome, so let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. Google I/O is a developers conference. It's a 2-day event in Moscone Center in San Francisco. On day 1, they did a lot of talking about statistics and putting out new products and things like that. They say there are over 100 million activated Android devices right now, and they're activating 400,000 new Android devices per day. They also announced an update to Honeycomb from version 3.0 to 3.1. That update became available to at least the Motorola Xoom this week, and hopefully to other Honeycomb-based devices in the very near future. Speaking of which, however, they did give out Samsung Galaxy Tab 10.1-inch versions to all of the attendees, all 5,000 of them, but the 3.1 update does not work on the Galaxy Tab yet. At the same time, they went ahead and announced version 2.4 of Android called Ice Cream Sandwich, which is the name that I released a couple of months ago. Now, the main goal of Ice Cream Sandwich is going to be to unify the entire platform, so you'll have the same OS on your phone, your tablet, and even your Google TV. I did talk about an idea like this about a few months ago, I don't know, 4 months ago maybe, on my second channel, Twil Talks. I'll have a link to that down there, as I always do. But basically, what they're going to do is, if you have something running on one device, you'll have a seamless experience, all of the same apps, hopefully, across all of your devices, so you can just move from one to the other. As far as I know, the details on it are still a little bit sketchy at this point, but as I learn more, I will definitely share that with you. If you've heard something that I have missed out on, definitely let me know down in the comments below. Now, it seems I did miss something when talking about Android version 3.1. They added in something called the Android Open Accessory API, which is basically an open standard that allows you to create devices and services that will interact seamlessly with Android version 2.3.4 and up. It also opens up a lot more options in terms of what you can do with the USB ports on devices, accepting input from different sorts of devices like mice, keyboards, and things like that, allowing widgets to be resized on the home screen, which is actually something that you've had available from different launchers for a long time now. Basically just a lot more interactivity with devices and with services. So this Open Accessory API should be a wonderful thing once devices actually start getting newer versions of Android. But at the same time, and I can't seem to find the story at the moment on that, a bunch of different providers, vendors, software solution, whatever, all came together and agreed that they would be putting out the same sort of releases in the same time frame. So I believe Verizon, AT&T, Vodafone, all those sorts of internet service providers, and companies like Motorola and HTC and companies, a whole different slew of companies. I'll see if I can find the link for you guys. They all said, we're going to get together and make sure that we get these releases out to you as soon as possible, so people aren't still sitting on Android 1.6 2 years from now. So if you have a relatively new phone, you should be able to get the newest, latest, and greatest version of Android as soon as it becomes available, within a relatively reasonable time frame. But that was pretty much day 1 of Google I/O. Day 2 was all about Chrome and Chrome OS. The big announcement, of course, on day 2 was that the Chromebooks would become available. If you don't remember, a few months ago I showed you the Google CR48. That was the prototype showing off Google's Chrome OS on a relatively unbranded version of hardware. Well, those same sorts of notebooks should be available in the very near future for somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $30 per month on a 3-year agreement, where you'd have 100 megabytes of free data per month, 3G data, and you'd have a hardware platform. I believe it has a dual-core processor, the same sort of 12-inch display and everything. If you're not familiar with that, I will go ahead and put a link to my CR48 videos down there as well. I don't know if it'll be 100% like the CR48 that I got, but it should be somewhat similar to that, probably with nicer specs. I know they're talking about doing a dual-core processor in it as well. But speaking of Chrome and Chrome OS, one of the awesome things I did see come out of Google I/O this week was that Angry Birds is now available in the Chrome Web Store. I did test it out very briefly on my CR48 and it did work. I think I tried it in Chrome on my desktop. It also worked there. So it's not just Chrome OS specific. If you have the Chrome or Chromium browser, it should work for you. And that's really the big news related to Google I/O. I'm sure there's a lot more that I missed, a lot more device-related news specifically, but those were just the key highlights for me. If there is something else I did forget to mention about it, definitely mention it down in the comment section below. I'm sure the other people would love to hear it. And the last thing to talk about this week is some Android releases. This week, Netflix officially became available for some Android devices, specifically some things like the HTC Evo 4G and the Nexus S and the HTC G2, if I remember correctly, a couple of others. However, some other people, specifically people running the Droid X with Gingerbread on it, some people running some rooted versions of the Droid Incredible with the Cyanogen mod, things like that, they've all been able to get it working for them. Who knows how long it will be working. I actually haven't gotten it working myself because after the last update to Gingerbread, there was a bit of a miscommunication. I ended up bricking my phone and having to soft flash back to the stock firmware, and I'm still on that for the time being. However, if you are running a Droid X, an original Droid, anything like that that has been updated to Gingerbread, go ahead and give it a shot. The APK is available on the XDA forums. I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. And actually, speaking of Netflix, there was an interview with one of the guys from Netflix this week, and basically the way that he talks, we might see Netflix on Linux before too long. They're talking about leveraging the power of HTML5 and the video tag to throw, if I remember reading correctly, all of the DRM into the stream itself, so they don't have to rely directly upon Silverlight or anything of that nature to make it work. So it should work directly in the browser using HTML5. Now there is of course no time frame on that, they're just talking about things that they're working on, they're not ready for it yet, but it is very cool that they are taking these new frameworks to mind, that they are working on it, so hopefully we will see Netflix on Linux eventually. And the last thing to mention, there was an update to Adobe Flash on Android this week. Go ahead to the market and check it out. It should be available for you there. Updated to version 10.3. It appears to be mainly bug fixes, so no big deal there. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions on any of the stories that I mentioned, definitely leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.